Well, in New York City, there was a publisher named George Palmer Putnam, GP for short. And GP published the book that Charles Lindbergh wrote about his experiences. Well, GP made more money on that book than any other book he had ever published in his entire career. And so he came up with the brilliant idea of finding the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, as long as she could write a book about it afterwards. And so he conducted all kinds of interviews in New York City, and the moment I walked in the door, he knew that I was Lady Lindy. You see, I looked so much like Charles Lindbergh that the two of us could have been brother and sister. He didn't care whether I could fly a plane or not. He just thought this would be great publicity. And so he decided to put together a group of people that he called the Friendship Flight, which consisted of a male pilot, a male navigator, and me, the passenger. Now, I really wanted to fly the plane, but I wasn't going to say anything because I knew this was a great opportunity. And actually, it was a very scary thing to do. You see, after Charles Lindbergh had flown across the Atlantic Ocean, 13 different people tried the same thing, and they landed right down at the bottom of the ocean. And so because of this, when we took off, we sort of took off in secret. And everything went fine, and we decided to go up to Nova Scotia to refuel. And when we got there, we ran into some horrible weather. And it started raining and raining, and it rained for an entire 2 weeks. Now, during that 2 weeks, the men who were in charge were drinking, and they were drunk the entire time. Well, I didn't let it bother me. I thought that's what men did because of my father. But then, when the sun finally came out and we decided to take off, the men were still drunk, but we took off anyway. Now, when we took off, the door sort of flew wide open, and they had to take a rope and just tie it up so I wouldn't fall out into the water. Now, you see, we wanted to go to Paris, but we really didn't care where we landed. We figured if we went across the Atlantic Ocean, we'd hit land somewhere. We really didn't care where. And when we finally spotted land, it took us 20 hours and 40 minutes. And we landed in the port of Wales. Now, by this time, the entire coast of Europe had heard that we were on our way. And so they were all cheering us on and waiting for us. And right away, I was given flowers, and my photograph was taken for every newspaper in the entire world and all the newsreels at the movie theaters. And the men who had done all the work were just sort of pushed in the background and ignored. Now, I was a little bit embarrassed about this, but I also realized that I liked the attention. Now, I had tea with Lady Astor, and then we took a boat back to New York City. And when we got there, there was a ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue. Now, this had only been done one other time before, when Charles Lindbergh had arrived, and it was very exciting. Now, right away, GP was very nice to me, and he allowed me to stay at his house where he helped me edit my book, and we became very close friends. We became such close friends that GP decided to leave his wife and family for me, which didn't bother me a bit. Now, after the book was finally finished, we called it 20 Hours and 40 Minutes. Now, GP was a great promoter. He really knew how to sell books. And so every morning we would get in the car, and we would go to a small town, and we would go to a breakfast meeting, and I would give a little lecture about my experiences, and then we would sell my books. And we did the same thing in another small town for lunch, and the same thing in another small town for dinner. And we were able to sell quite a few books that way. Now, after a while, GP kept asking me to marry him. And I told him I really don't want to marry anyone. But after he asked me for the 6th time, I said, all right, I'll marry you already. But you see, the night before the wedding, he wrote me this letter, See, I wasn't very romantic. I wrote it in pencil. Dear GP, there are some things which should be writ before we are married, things we have talked over before, most of them. You must know again my reluctance to marry, my feeling that I shatter thereby chances in work, which means so much to me. I feel the move just now as foolish as anything I could do. I know there may be compensations, but have no heart to look ahead. In our life together, I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you similarly. If we can be honest, I think the difficulties which arise may best be avoided. Please let us not interfere with the other's work or play, nor let the world see our private joys or disagreements. In this connection, I may have to keep some place where I can go to be myself now and then, for I cannot guarantee to endure at all times the confinements of even an attractive cage. I must exact a cruel promise, and that is you will let me go in a year if we find no happiness together. I will try to do my best in every way. A.E. Well, we were married the next day. We were married in a judge's chambers. I wore a brown suit. And we didn't take a honeymoon. We just got right back to work trying to sell our books. Now, right away, I told GP that what I really wanted to do now that we were married was to fly my own plane across the Atlantic Ocean, as long as I could just use my own plane and go by myself and write a book about it afterwards. And so he agreed. And so I took off by myself. And when I landed right in the middle of Ireland, and there were all these sheep that just scattered all about, and it was about 4:30 in the morning. And there was a little hut nearby, and so I knocked on the door and woke up the family that lived there and told them that I was Amelia Earhart and I had just landed in their field. Well, about 4 hours later, we restaged it for the press. And my photograph was on the front page of every newspaper throughout the entire world with the family that I had woken up. I took a boat back to New York City, and this time I had my own ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue, and it was very exciting. Now, of course, right away, I wrote a book. I called it For the Fun of It. You see, a reporter came up to me and asked me